Hi guys, Scott with the Tech Report here. We're here in Damage Labs, and today we're going to build a new PC. As you probably expect, Damage Labs is full of test systems. I've got all the latest hardware, GPUs, CPUs, all the stuff that I test. However, my own personal PC that I use to, edit articles, edit video, edit photos, basically produce the site. We use it for streaming the podcast. It's the host PC. That system is over 4 years old, and the CPU is pre-Sandy Bridge, so it's getting pretty long in the tooth. And I decided just to start over from scratch. So to make that happen, what I did was I went to some of our top sponsors, including Cooler Master, Gigabyte, and OCZ, and I just asked them to support us in the building of a new system for me. And so they agreed to support us, and what they did was kind of open up their product catalog. So I looked at their products, I kind of thought about what I wanted to put together, and I just basically shopped their websites and picked things out. So I'm going to show you what components I chose for my own system and why briefly, and then we'll put the system together and show you what that looks like. Okay guys, so the first thing that we're going to talk about amongst the components is kind of the core components that you build everything else around. So these are the things that really go, the core of the system functionally in terms of the computing part. So let's start with the motherboard. This is a Z97 chipset based motherboard from Gigabyte called the Z97X G1 Gaming. This is one of Gigabyte's premium boards for this class of thing. The Z97 is kind of a mid-range to slightly high-end enthusiast chipset, and this is the premier motherboard from Gigabyte that uses that chipset. I'll tell you that the G1 gaming boards are a little pricier, and I wouldn't always recommend spending the extra on one of these, but the features kind of waterfall down. So if you like what you see here, then you can go get one of the lower end, a little more affordable Gigabyte boards and get similar firmware and feature set and all of that. They just kind of depopulate the boards a little bit when they go down the price chain. But let's talk briefly about what makes this board special, because it has a few extra features that are kind of nice. One of them is the PCI Express slots. Now, this is a Haswell chip, so it doesn't have enough lanes to support 4 PCI Express by 16 full lane configs, but it does have 4 physical PCI Express by 16 connectors on it, and it can support at least 2 GPUs nicely, and maybe more, with just room for other expansion cards and things like that. So it's really nice there. Also up front here, there's a SATA Express connector, and I think we've got like one drive that uses that we've reviewed, but SATA Express is the future, you could say. So there's some future proofing in that connector. Also around back here, you'll see this is a special sound setup. So this is a Creative Audio chip. It's the Core 3D, and then they've got the capacitors here that are different color that are just kind of lined up, that are associated with the audio. And the idea here is, we had a debate on the site recently about, do I still need a sound card? One reason that you may need a sound card is because it's often hard to isolate for analog signal quality what's happening on the motherboard with the transfer path for the audio. And so Gigabyte has attempted to do that in the design of this board, which is what they're kind of indicating visually with what they've got laid out here. And what they say they've done is they've done the shortest trace, most direct and shortest trace paths that they can for the audio to minimize interference. And then they've even routed the left and right channels on different layers of the PCB in order to improve signal quality. So we're going to try that out and see what we think. On the back here, other ports include notably an Ethernet port for a killer NIC, which is a gaming focused. It's sold as better for gaming. I'm not sure if that's really what I want to use all the time. I'm not sure it's better, but we're going to try that. And then the best thing about it is, since there's a second port, they've got a good old Intel Gigabit Ethernet NIC connected to that. So basically you can pick between the 2 premium options for Ethernet on this thing. So that's the motherboard. It's got check it out, it's got its own power button right on it, so if you've got it on a test bench, you don't even have to have power connected. And it's good looking with the black and the red. And what you'll find is that everything that we've picked, kind of by accident almost, matches the color scheme for this thing. briefly, let's talk about one thing that matches, which is the DIMMs. They're DDR3 from G.Skill. They're Trident X DIMMs. These are ready to go to 2400 megahertz. And G.Skill has been recommended in a lot of our system guides lately because they've had good prices for DDR3 memory. And so I figured, well, let's see if how this stuff is. I should be using it in my own system since we're making that recommendation. So G.Skill agreed to send these, and so I'm going to try them out. And as you can see, they just match perfectly with the board. And then I talked to Intel, and the CPU that we have here is a Devil's Canyon. It's a Core i7 4790K. If you're not familiar, I think this is about $330 some list price. It's not super expensive like a Haswell E, but it's not super cheap. The deal with this is that it is a quad-core processor based on Haswell, 22 nanometers, latest microarchitecture from Intel, 4 cores, 8 threads, so it has hyper-threading. But the most exciting thing about this, and kind of the reason that I picked it, is it gives you the highest clock speed for the Haswell architecture that you can get. You can buy more cores with the Haswell E, you can spend up to $1,000, but you don't get the clock speeds as high as this. So for any task that is relying on per thread performance primarily, instead of being gated by just lots and lots of threads, then you will find that this may be one of the fastest CPUs. And that includes gaming. In my test, this is the fastest gaming CPU in the world. So I could have gone Haswell E. It's a little more pricey, but I wanted to take some of my own medicine in this regard too. This is what I would recommend to most people, and so this is what I'm going to put into my system. I may even see if I can overclock it a little. Next thing up is these Gigabyte graphics cards, the G1 Gaming GTX 970. The 980 version of this, which is a little pricier, is one that I gave an editor's choice to because I liked it so much. And I think Gigabyte has just done a great job. This is not too tall, as you can see the profile, so it doesn't stick up out of the case too much. The only compromise is that it's a little bit longer, so you need to have room in your case lengthwise for it. But the 3 fans cover a ton of heatsink area. And there's a fair amount of copper in here. This is fairly weighty, so it's a good cooler, and it's higher clock than stock on the 970, so it's almost as fast as a stock 980, and still costs quite a bit less. One thing that Gigabyte has done that's nice is they give you a lot of ports. They've got triple DisplayPort outputs, so you could do a 3-way G-Sync config right out of the box, or they have dual DVI at the same time. So a lot of other 970, 980 cards, a little bit more limited. I don't expect I'm going to actually need all those ports, but it is nice to have them just for future proofing and things like that. They also have a good back plate on the back to protect it, so if you're clumsy when you're working in your case, then you're less likely to do damage to it. Now, the controversial or maybe surprising thing here is I have a second one for SLI. As you guys might know, I don't always recommend 2 GPUs. In fact, my advice generally has been get the biggest GPU you can and then go dual. In this case, a couple things were in play. One of them is just there's some value proposition with 2 970s. You could get a 980 for like $550 or more. The 970s are like $330. So 2 970s is not that much more than a single 980. And then the only other next step up in terms of single GPU performance is a Titan X at $1,000. So for well under $1,000, you can go multi-GPU in this config, and it's a pretty good option. Now, there are limits with multi-GPU, but this is another thing where I kind of wanted to, this is not really taking my own medicine, but it's kind of something I felt like I needed to explore because I've been slamming on multi-GPU stuff a little bit. I think NVIDIA has done a reasonably good job. They do a lot of work in their drivers to make SLI work well, and I wanted to just live with it day by day and see what it's like. I've had more frustration from Crossfire on the Radeon side than from NVIDIA on the SLI side, and I just wanted to kind of have that point of reference. So we're going to put dual 970s in, and I'm not going to apologize for it. I'm happy to have them. We'll see. I may connect all this to a 4K display and kind of see how that goes. All right, so up next is the storage subsystem of this thing, and that's going to be anchored by this OCZ Vector 150 drive. This is an SSD. It's a 480 gig Vector 150, and the Vector series 150, and then they just released the 180, which has a little bit different flash but similar performance. These are among the fastest SATA SSDs that we've ever tested. OCZ now is, as you may know, a subsidiary of Toshiba, so that it has Toshiba NAND in it, and then it has a Barefoot controller. I think it's a Barefoot 3 controller that's OCZ's own proprietary thing that we found to be an awfully good performer. So I've got a couple of these, which is awesome. What I'm going to do is I'm going to install the operating system and my programs on one of them and run those off of the SSD. And then the second one I'll use for my Steam library, and then maybe like as a scratch disk for video editing. So I'm pretty excited about being able to put my games onto an SSD and run them. And I will say that when you're thinking about buying SSDs, that it's a good thing to consider the possibility of getting higher capacity drives, just because the cost per gigabyte is lower on the higher capacity drives. So sometimes it's worth putting a little more of your budget into a larger drive if you can swing it, because it's actually a better value. Now, that's a good start, but it's not enough for me. My system is kind of the hub of Damage Labs, so I have to store a lot of video, podcast audio, images, games, everything that we do. I kind of just store on that system. So I talked to the folks at WD, and they were kind enough to send out a couple of these. These are WD Red drives, and the red line is WD's lineup for use in network attached storage devices, or NASs, and then RAID arrays. And in my case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use these red drives in a RAID 1 mirror. Now, I've been doing this in my system for a long time. As you may know, hard drives do die. They're spinning, usually at a fairly high RPM. There's moving parts inside, and sometimes they fail. So one way that you can sort of mitigate the risk of that is just by putting two drives together into a RAID 1 mirror. They both store the same things, basically. If one of them fails, you still have the other one that's good to go. So that's what I'm going to do with this. And as you maybe can see, these things are 6 terabytes in size. So I'm going to have a total of 6 terabytes of redundant storage in the new system. I'm very excited about that. That's a huge upgrade from where I've been in the past. And I only made one mistake when I talked to WD about sending these out, which is our hard drive storage config actually consists of 3 drives. So I have a RAID 1 mirror in my system with 2 drives, and then I have a third drive of the same capacity that I use in a USB 3.0 drive dock, and I back up my system to that external drive and then take it and set it on a shelf so that I have a copy offline of my data. And so I'm going to have to get another drive that's pretty large just to hold the compressed contents of this RAID array when all is said and done. Anyway, that's the storage subsystem, and I don't think it gets much better than that. You maybe could go for PCI Express SSDs, but we found that they're still in their infancy. And if you look at Jeff's latest article on that, the real-world impacts for desktop usage models, for things you do every day, loading programs, booting systems, running games, PCI Express SSDs haven't yet got a measurable performance advantage. So I think SATA is a fine way to go for now, and PCI Express will be something that we'll want in the future, but it's not necessary quite yet. All right, so next up is the case, power, and cooling portion of the build. And all of this stuff for this portion of it is from Cooler Master. Starting with, as you can see right here, this is the case. It's a Silencio 652S. This is about a $120 case that we reviewed not long ago. And, it's kind of on its side here, but you can kind of get a sense. It's good looking, it's kind of stately, it's not overstated. It's the style that I kind of like, something pretty straightforward. And it's all black, it'll match all the peripherals that you've already seen. And the idea with the Silencio is to be, it's a mid-tower ATX. It's meant to be easy to build in and to be very quiet. So inside of it, all of the sort of surfaces have things like this. This is a foam anti-noise lining, and then there are a lot of filters and things to keep dust out. So this is kind of meant for keeping things, you know, nice and quiet and cool, and it's got premium Silencio fans in it to go along with that. And then it has, like a lot of the good ATX cases these days, you know, it's got a nice cutout behind the motherboard for the CPU. It's got grommets around the motherboard so that you can do your cable routing, and has a very flexible drive bay design with multiple cages that you can take in and out. So we'll probably look at that. I talked about how the graphics cards on this thing are going to be a little bit long. So to make room for them, I think we're going to have the opportunity to move some cages around inside if necessary to make that go. So to pair with the Silencio case, I have a Cooler Master closed loop liquid cooler. This is a Neptune 120 XL, which should be more than capable of cooling our Haswell Devil's Canyon processor. This is a liquid cooler that basically, you know, this is the pump and the water block are here, and then the radiator is here, and so you set this up so that it is basically the fans are taking the heat across the radiator and out of the case. So, you know, liquid cooling is nice. It's not, some people kind of think it's magic, you have to have it. I'm not in that camp, but I do like it just because it does a nice job of transporting the heat through the liquid medium so that you can expel it from the case efficiently. Now, some of you guys may know, my last system that I had a closed loop liquid cooler in from another brand, the thing leaked out and actually failed on me, and I had to switch to an air cooler. I wrote about that. I'm hoping that this one's going to serve me a little bit better, and I kind of expect it will. So that's that. And you know, the other thing about this that's nice is the Cooler Master provides the same Silencio 120 millimeter fans with this cooler that it does with the case. So all of it matches in terms of the design and also in terms of the acoustic profile of the fans. The next piece of this is the power supply, and this is a Cooler Master V750 PSU. 750 watts is pretty much all you need unless you're going crazy with hard drives or you're building Haswell E. Even with 2 GPUs, I don't anticipate a problem. And this is coming from, you know, I measure power consumption on our test systems all the time, including with multiple GPUs. So I'm pretty confident in that assessment. The thing that you have to look for in a power supply is not just the wattage, but the connector payload, because you need to have the right connectors to support like graphics cards that support a certain number of pin inputs, maybe multiples of those. In this case, we've got everything we need once everything's connected. The V750 is interesting because it's semi-modular. Now, modular power supplies are all the rage. I love them. I think they're great. But it turns out that it costs a fair amount of money to build a power supply that is fully modular. And what semi-modular means is basically that this core ATX power and the connectors for that, and also then I guess the PCI Express, those things are going to be just built right in, and they don't disconnect. Since you're pretty much always going to be using these, it's not really a problem that they don't come off, and you can save some money by going with the semi-modular. So that's what I did with the V750, and then I've got these connectors here will allow me to put on the additional leads that I need for my particular build without having anything extra. All right, so the last bit of components that we're going to talk about here are the peripherals, because Cooler Master's involved, of course. Then we wanted to do, you know, keyboard, mouse, and all of that kind of thing. And maybe my favorite component of the whole system, because you know, kind of a freak about this stuff, is the mechanical keyboard, which is a Quickfire XT. And the Quickfire XTs are nice. They're basically a very basic, full-size keyboard, mechanical keyboard with cherry switches, which, you know, we like those around here. But the thing that makes this one special, other than the build quality and all of that, is that it has cherry MX green switches. Now the greens are hard to find. In fact, I'm not sure, you probably can't find one of these at Newegg, but you might be able to find it on Cooler Master's website every now and then. Cooler Master has done a few exclusive keyboards with the green switches. And the greens are different from the other cherry switches that you may have heard about in that they're much more tightly sprung, so they require more effort. more downforce to push them down. Kind of like, I think it's the Blues, these have a tactile bump and an audible click when the key is actuated. So you get lots of positive feedback, but they also require just a little bit more effort to depress. And I think it's the best combination of everything that you can get on a keyboard. It's great positive feedback, and I'm just kind of giddy about being able to use it. So this is a great keyboard. If you don't want that much push, then you can look Cooler Master. All of its products, they offer the browns and the blues and the other switch types, and those are more widely available. So you might check that out. But that's my keyboard. It's my style, and I really like it. The other thing we have is a Mizar mouse. And Jeff wrote a review of this for the Tech Report recently. The Mizar it may remind you of the old Microsoft IntelliMouse. It's kind of a similar shape. It's a little bit smaller. And everything about the materials and all of that, has been updated. It's got a laser sensor. It's 8200 DPI with adjustable sensitivity on the fly. And it's got nice textured materials on it and all of that. So that's going to be the mouse that I'm going to pair with this keyboard and the rest of the system. And then finally, this is a Series 500 headset from Cooler Master. And, this is just an opportunity. I have an old, you've probably seen it on the podcast, maybe I have a very old Plantronics headset that I've been using forever. And I wanted something that was a little bit nicer. So this has got really beefy cups here. I think it's got good speakers inside, and then a removable boom if you want to use that. And I definitely do for podcasting and multiplayer gaming. So I'm going to try this out and see how it goes as well. So that's it for the peripherals. Next thing up is we're going to try and put this thing together and show you what it looks like. Okay guys, the build is finished. The process from start to finish took me somewhere around 90 minutes. Not really sure because once you get into it, you kind of lose track of time, which is what happened to me here. But I think that was about how long it took. And I was taking my time with the cable routing, making sure everything was nice and neat and everything went where I wanted it to go. So the process was really pretty smooth considering that. I didn't run into any of the snags you sometimes have, like there were headers for everything I wanted to connect. All the fans had headers available, and I didn't need plug adapters or anything. Everything was very compatible, which is one of the benefits of using all the latest stuff together in the same generation instead of carrying over parts from the past and things like that. So it was really good. And I think it came out exceptionally well. Let's zoom in here and I'll show you a little closer what it looks like. Okay, so here are the guts of the system. And you can see, there are a few cable things that are sticking up here that are maybe not perfect. But generally speaking, I think it's pretty neat. I've done most of my cable routing through the grommets that are surrounding the motherboard. And then, if there is some spaghetti wiring, it happened in the back. So the two hard drives are right here. I might have optimally spaced them apart from one another just for thermal reasons, and I might yet do that. But I've got them both here. They're in these cages that can slide in and out. The two SSDs are in these two cages. They're also retractable and are very nice, nicely situated in there. The graphics cards, obviously you can see they're connected with the SLI bridge. So we've got that multi-GPU capability. The power supply, which is, again, is semi-modular, the only thing that doesn't disconnect from it are cables that you're going to want to connect to the motherboard. And then other than that, I've got just a little bit of like one lead plugged into it, which is nice and neat. And the rest of it, I didn't have to even plug in anything else to power everything in the system because I just have the 4 drives here. And the rest of it is pretty much, the PCI Express leads and things that you want. The cooler up here, the water cooler, the Neptune, I put both fans around the radiator and sandwich it up against the back of the case. And then those hoses come right up off the block like that, which is nice and neat. And, all in all, I think it's pretty good. There's room in here to work if I need to get in and do something. Which was nice during the build process and will be nice if I decide to upgrade or change anything going forward. There's also quite a bit more room left for at least one more hard drive here, a couple of 2.5-inch drives here, and then the 5.25-inch bays are currently just empty. There are 3 of those up in there. So, it's a clean build with you know, pretty much everything you want. Actually, a little bit of excess, a little bit of indulgence, but still room for some additional expansion. Really not bad because the case is $119 at Newegg, so we're not talking about a super expensive case, but this is kind of state of the art right now. There's no reason to spend much more than this unless you're going to build something that's just really a behemoth of tons of storage or a triple GPU or something like that. So pretty good setup. Next thing to do is let's flip it around back and I'll show you how that looks. Okay guys, here's the back of the system, and you can see this is where the wiring kind of hides so that it doesn't look bad up top. But you know, truth being told, I don't think it's all that bad back here considering everything. There are a few places where things kind of bunch up, but you know, the routing is pretty straightforward, just in the sense that it can be pretty direct, given that you can go from kind of point to point across these grommets and come up where you need to on the other side. You can see the back plate for the water cooler here, the bracket, which is just a sort of a screw-on assembly that you put in there. And you can see the back side of the SSDs and the hard drives where they connect with the power and the SATA leads. So one thing that is a concern, it was a concern in our review of the Silencio 652S case, is just the amount of width that you have for cabling behind the motherboard tray. This gives you maybe like ½ an inch, which is pretty tight. And so what I did, and I knew that was a potential issue, so what I did when I put it together was I thought about making sure that as much as possible big cable bundles didn't cross one another when I did the routing. It took me a little bit of extra time just to make sure that things were routed properly, but once I did that, then everything will lay up against the edge here, and the side goes on without any trouble. So it's really not that big of a deal if you kind of plan for it and pay attention as you build. So that's nice. The other thing I was going to point out is the case comes with zip ties, which a lot of people like to use, but the sort of just holding the cables in place with your motherboard, with your power supply. Oftentimes you get these black twist ties, and I actually prefer those because they're easy to add and remove, and they don't look too bad because they're black. So instead of zip tying everything together, which feels pretty permanent, I actually just use twist ties to make sure that the cables are nicely situated and stable. All right, so now I've got the system plugged in and running, and you can see that it's on. You can see the lights. You got the WindForce, Gigabyte WindForce cards have these interesting blue lights, and then there's the LEDs on the cooler as well. That's about it for lighting. There's not a ton of bling here. And because this is a silent case with foam covering the side panel, there's not even a case window. So this is what it looks like when it's on, and you can probably not hear the thing running through my microphone. I don't think it's picking anything up, simply because it is really flipping quiet. I kind of didn't expect this. My old case is a Corsair 600T graphite series, and I thought that was a pretty quiet case, but it turns out that this is just worlds apart. The fan speed control, the cooler, which has the same type of fans in it, all combined together. When it's at idle, when it's not doing anything in particular and the fans haven't spun up, then it's basically inaudible in a normal room. You know, there's background noise in the house and things in any room, and you can be right next to this thing and barely hear it. When the CPU kicks on, you're running more, you know, intensive loads, then you do hear the fans, but the peak loudness is just not what it used to be, not what it was on my prior system, and really very reasonable. So I'm exceptionally pleased with this. I honestly didn't expect it to be as good as it is on that front. So, you know, that's a huge benefit. It's amazing what the state-of-the-art stuff for, again, this $119 case will get you. And you know, credit goes to all the components here. The triple fan coolers on the video cards, the power supply, the CPU cooler, everything with a moving part in it, which is basically just coolers in this case, you know, is made to throttle down nicely at idle, be really quiet, and basically then has overkill on the cooling front, even when it's under load. So, you know, it just doesn't have to get very loud to evacuate all the heat. So this is Damagebox 2015. I've already got this system at this point installed and running Windows. I've done thermal testing on it. I've got most of my applications and data moved over to it, and it's basically going to be my main system. I have no trouble, like the thermal testing, what I found is that it really doesn't have any trouble with just the defaults in the BIOS, which is sort of normal smart fan speed control for taking care of all the heat and doing it quietly, because with this cooling, these components really are not stressing what you can evacuate. However, I did use Gigabyte software to do some custom fan curve profiles. It will look at your fans, profile them, and then create a custom fan curve based on load. So I've got that going. It's the Windows software I use for that, and it works. And I don't know if it's much quieter, but it's kind of the last step refinement that you want. Let's talk about the storage config real quick. The hard drives are, again, 6 terabytes, which is crazy, and they're in a RAID 1 array. So if I lose one drive, then I still have all my data, and I've got all my data already moved over there. I don't have a NAS on the network. Instead, my main system kind of acts as a NAS for everything else on the network. So this is my main storage pool. And then the SSDs here, the OCZ SSDs, one of them I'm booting off of, and that's really snappy. The other one has all my Steam games on it, so I'm really pleased to have that. In fact, it's almost already full, but it's cleared up some space on my main array, and it means the games launch faster, so I'm really happy to have that as well. Let's talk about the DIMMs in here, the G-Skills. Those are DDR3 DIMMs rated for operation at 2400 megahertz, which is crazy fast and not really necessary, but nice to have. So I tried to use the XMP profile on this to get basically you can just choose the profile and it will set the voltage and the timings and the clock speed for you so that everything runs appropriately. Profile 1 on these DIMMs actually didn't boot up stable. So I had to switch to Profile 2, and I'm not even sure what the difference is with Profile 2. I think it's about the same. It's 2400 megahertz, 1.65 volts, reasonable timings, but that works and is perfectly stable in Windows. So I've been running at that speed, which is nice and fast. And the CPU side, most motherboards these days, including this one, Gigabyte does it, all the other guys do it. If you have a Core i7 that has turbo ratios and you've got like 4-core, 3-core, 2-core, 1-core turbo ratios, and like on this CPU, the peak 1-core turbo ratio is 4.4 gigahertz. What they do is basically they key on, if you mess with the memory settings, then they turn on the 4-core turbo ratio to the top speed, in this case 4.4 gigahertz. You can usually disable that with by turning off an option called multi-core enhancement in the BIOS, but honestly I didn't really mind in this case. I like the idea of having all 4 cores a little bit overclocked, so that's what I've got. It runs at 4.4 gigahertz with all cores busy. There is an opportunity maybe to go higher. I found that Devil's Canyon CPUs like this Core i7-4790K will do 4.7 or 4.8 gigahertz reasonably often. So I may try to get a few hundred more megahertz out of this. But really I'm pretty happy with where it is right now. It's nice and snappy and not bad at all. So that's pretty much Damagebox 2015. I'm very pleased with how it came out. I am also working on an article where I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about the build process and show some screenshots from the OCZ utilities for the SSDs, which allow you to configure some things and understand some things about your drives that are kind of nice. So you might want to check that out at techreport.com. But yeah, this is the build, and I'm hoping to use it for a number of years. Thanks for watching.